I was working on a research vessel the night of my near-death experience. We had just returned from a mission in which we'd used a new submersible, and the representative from that submersible was on board. We couldn't enter the small harbor because the seas were so rough that the ship would sink at the harbor's entrance if a wave crashed beneath her. We dropped anchor a few miles offshore late at night and decided to enter the harbor after the storm passed the next day. The submersible agent was eager to get to shore so he could catch his aircraft home. Several other members of the crew desired to return home. They had agreed to meet us at the dock first thing in the morning. They persuaded a deckhand and myself to take them in on our inflatable Zodiac. The captain suggested we wear life vests, which we consented to do with my help. We were all experienced divers and sub-operators who had spent a lot of time in the sea and on the water. To find the dusty old vest stashed below, we had to search in the boat captain's locker. The majority of us hadn't worn a vest in years, and these were vintage M. West life vests. We plotted a course to the harbor by checking our position on the radar and loading everyone's gear. The Zodiac was then lowered into the water. The deckhand drove the boat from the stern, while I navigated from the bow. The boat had a V4 engine and could really fly across the water, but it sat extremely low in the water and we couldn't see the harbor lights for the most part due to the sea's big swells and troughs. We didn't take long to lose our bearings on the port. We were plummeting suddenly as a wave burst beneath us, and I was yelling for the deck guy to turn the boat around and head back out to sea. When the sky became dark and a ridge of froth was 20 feet above our heads, the mate had turned the boat around and begun going back out to sea. We were a mile out from the harbor in a sandbar breaker zone. When I saw the froth, I yelled to everyone, "Oh shit, this is it," and the wave slammed on us. From bow to stern, the wave folded the boat in half. When the metal and fiberglass floor fell apart and the motor snapped off the transom, 3 of the 4 inflatable pontoons ruptured. When the wave crashed down on me, I was flung from the bow into the ocean, and it swirled and threw me about. It was the most ferocious, violent force I'd ever felt hitting my body, and I was cut off from everyone. I'd lost all sense of direction, and the sea was tossing me around like a toy. When I opened my eyes to blow some bubbles to figure out which way was up, the sand and salt burnt, and the sky was so dark that I couldn't see the bubbles. I had no idea which direction was up, but all of my diving expertise had taught me not to panic. I waited and waited for this ancient Mae West life vest to bring me back to the surface. There are no streetlights out at sea, so it's pitch black. The waves continued to hurl me around, and my lungs burned as I tried to take a breath of air. But the surface was never within my grasp, and the pain in my lungs lessened as time went, but it was growing quite chilly. As a wave of ecstasy washed over me, I realized my brain was running low on oxygen. I held my breath for what felt like eternity, but eventually the ecstasy overtook me and I tried to breathe salt water. All I could think was the searing in my lungs. The heat faded gradually, and there was blackness, chilly darkness. I gradually became aware of the light. Everything around me was getting lighter. I couldn't feel anything in my body anymore. I had a feeling of where I was, but I wasn't there. I also began to feel warmer and more at ease. I was lured to a brighter region in the light. I couldn't stop myself. It seemed like the right thing to do, and it felt comfortable. I was overcome with a sensation of welcome and welcome home, as well as an enormous sense of affection. I was overjoyed. I felt so at ease and appreciated. My physical body had vanished, and I had transformed into light without a form. I didn't pass judgment. I simply accepted my change. It felt so natural. Then, within the light, I sensed others with me and more approaching. I was continuing making my way towards them. Movement towards these individuals was unintentional, yet I wanted to be with them. These other entities or people recognized me, and they were the ones who greeted me. They were encouraging me and assisting me in adjusting. More beings appeared, perhaps a dozen in total, and they surrounded me. I recognized everyone, and it seemed like a family. Before I could interact with any of them, I began to see flashes of my life. I've since discovered that this is known as a life review, and is difficult to convey the image's persistent intensity. The experience cannot be adequately described in words. They weren't simply images, but they were also feelings, and not just my feelings. I could sense other people's emotions and how my actions in this world had affected them. I felt their delight, happiness, heartaches, disappointments, love, and all of their other feelings. It felt as though I was revisiting my life in order to learn and grow from my experiences. The sights and feelings then altered. I was being shown images that had nothing to do with my life. I became puzzled and perplexed, because I was seeing sections of my life that had not occurred yet. The other entities were there for me, but not in words. They were thinking about me with love and concern. They told me incredibly sensitive things about my life that I don't want to talk about here. This is not your time. You must return. I heard quite clearly and definitely just then. I didn't want to go back. I pleaded to remain. This is not your moment, I was told over again. You're here for a reason. Suddenly, I realized that I needed to return to my body and continue living my life. Being in God's light made it all the more difficult to return to this world. I didn't want to go back. This was more agonizing than drowning itself. I've come to refer to the group of entities who were with me as my soul group. My soul group assisted me in returning to my body. I was already wishing I could stay. Returning was the most difficult thing I'd ever been asked to do. My body went motionless and hanging in the sea, still being tumbled and pounded by the sand and water. Sailors will take the ends of a rope and weave them back together. This is referred to as the bitter end. The end of a rope had looped itself around my arm and was banging against my chest. The other end of the rope was connected to the zodiac. When the following set of waves slammed into me, the rope dislocated my shoulder and thumb and yanked me to the surface. 3 of the 4 air-filled compartments had been deflated, but one still had air in it. My body was entangled in the rope and the pontoon, which was filled with air. The waves smashed into me so forcefully that they forced water out of my lungs. When I took my first breath, my spirit was slammed back into my body. My lungs were on fire, my head was throbbing, and I would have submerged again if I hadn't become entangled with the boat. I choked, puked, and attempted to breathe again. I could hear my name being called out in the distance. My shipmates were on the lookout for me. They had discovered a flashlight, but everything else had been destroyed. They swam over to me and the remains of the boat. We were still 1 mile from the shore. We all clung to the boat and began swimming to shore. I was still having problems staying above the surface after I got untangled, so I kicked off my boots, which didn't help matters. I then undid my life vest, only to discover that the lining was ripped and waterlogged. I was being dragged down by my life vest. What was supposed to save my life killed me, only to be saved by the terrible end. When we arrived at the dock, 2 of my shipmates reattached my dislocated arm. I was in shock by the time I got home and saw my wife. She was a nurse who cared for me. It took me 2 days to really reconnect with my body. Part of me maintained a connection with the light until I repressed it sufficiently.